Hey, good morning, or I'm sorry, good afternoon, everybody, because it just turned 12. This is Jason Weller with the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. Hopefully you're here to join us this afternoon to learn about how to be a more effective pickleball player. Oh, wait, no, sorry, that's tomorrow's webinar. Yeah, this afternoon we're here to talk about the ALICE report. That's right, I had my days mixed up. So we know that we just hit the 12 o'clock mark, and there are still a lot of folks logging in to join us. So while we give them a minute or two, a couple of quick housekeeping things. We do have two handouts that are available for download, and for those of you that are unfamiliar with the GoToWebinar platform, you'll have a little toolbar on the right-hand side of your upper right-hand side of your screen. And there's a couple of things there. There's questions and there's handouts, among other things. And those will be the two things that we'll have you focus on today. With handouts, just click on the little icon and a list will pop up. There's two things. I've made it very easy for you. There's a copy of the 2019 ALICE report itself, which you can download. And then there's also, because every time we do a data report, we always have folks ask for the for the crib notes and for the cheat sheets. And so I also created a PDF of the slides we'll be talking about to highlight the data from the ALICE report. So you've got the cheat sheet and you've got the report itself at your availability. So again, all you need to do is pick the document or documents you want to download, just click on them, and the download should start automatically. And the other thing is that we are expecting a fairly large crowd today, and those of you that have done webinars with us in the past know that even when we have 15 people on a webinar, we keep everybody muted just for continuity's sake, and we're definitely going to do that today because with the size of folks we have calling in. So if you have a question, and we suspect you will, and because we're going to cover a fair amount of territory this afternoon, please use the aforementioned toolbar, questions, just click on that. A little dialog box will pop up, and you can type it in, and then you just send it off. The only thing you have to decide is if you want to send it to me directly or if you want to share it with the larger audience. And please, if it's a general question, please feel free to share it with the larger group so that everybody gets a chance to see what you're asking. For the most part, with questions, we'll try to address those immediately, but there's, depending on how broad it is, we may just table it till the very end. So don't get frustrated if you don't see us address the question immediately. So otherwise, I think we're actually good to go. We had a huge surge of people just join us as I was going through those instructions. So I think given that we're a couple minutes after the hour and we've got a lot of content to cover, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists today. We are joined by two absolute rock stars. We've got Nancy Lindeman, who is the Director of Public Policy and Partnerships at the Michigan Association of United Ways. And we've got Lynn Raymond, who's the Director of the Lakeshore Housing Alliance. And for those of you that don't know where that is, that's in Ottawa County. So once again, thank you to both of you for being willing to join with us today and walk everybody through the details of the ALICE report. I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation. So to give Lynn and Nancy a little bit better sense of who we have with us on the webinar, we do have a couple of poll questions, and I think we'll go ahead and start by asking a couple of very broad questions to see kind of where everybody's at. And we'll start with, have you actually looked at the ALICE report from 2019? And we'll give everybody a few, probably 10 or 20 more seconds to respond. Although actually almost 3/4 of you have already responded. So let's see, we'll give you maybe 5 more seconds. And I do see that some of you do have your sense of humor today, with a couple of you have responded to define read. So I appreciate that. So, okay. So just so we get a sense, about a little less than 1/3 of you have actually read the report, and some level, and obviously almost nearly 2/3 of you have not. So that is very handy information for Nancy and Lynn to have. All right, so moving on. To get a better sense of kind of where you're coming from, we're also interested in seeing what data sources you've been using. Obviously, 1/3 of you have looked at the report, but we're also interested in seeing what other data sources you're using. If you're using HMIS data, if you're using National Low-Income Housing Reports, or something else. And of course, this is a question where you can have more than one answer. So folks are, I think, taking their bit more time to respond to this. So I'll give you maybe 10 more seconds. All right, so I'm going to close it down here in about 5 seconds. Although a lot of you, wow, almost 85%, or more than 80% of folks on the webinar have responded so far. So this is very good. This is a super good return rate. So let's see. Wow, you are all over the place. So Campaign to End Homelessness Annual Report, 2/3 of you have been looking at that. 40% of you have used the ALICE report. 1/3 of you have used the National Low-Income Housing Reports, either Out of Reach or GAP, and then half of you are using other data sources. So fascinating. And then last but not least, we want to find out what you've been using this data for, because that's the next big question, right? So once again, this is there's no right answer. Click as many of the boxes as appropriate, and these are very broad categories. In terms of advocacy, engaging with media, building community awareness, fundraising. So kind of just pick the ones that seem closest to what you've been doing. And once again, wow, this is a pretty quick response rate from everybody. So very much appreciate that. But I think we'll close things down here in about 5 more seconds, because we're rocking about it. 80% of you have already responded. That gives us a pretty good sense of where folks are at on the webinar today. So, and let me see, about 1/3 of you with fundraising, 3/4 of you with advocacy, which is awesome, and we'll circle back to advocacy at the end of the presentation. Community awareness, again, nearly 80%. Engaging with the media, about 20%, and other purposes, nearly half of you. Okay, so this is some pretty good stuff, and you've got a savvy group, which is good, because most of them haven't looked at the ALICE report, but they are definitely used to looking at data. So this will hopefully, as we're going through today, this will give them some ideas of new things that they can be doing. So, okay, and let me go up here to sharing and pull up the oops.
So from those numbers, it looks like fairly high percentage of folks have used the ALICE report, 40% in the past for some of this great work that you're doing. And maybe not as many have had a chance to read the 2019 report at 30%, which came out just in March. So what we're going to do is share with you high-level information, statewide information about the 2019 ALICE report. It's all based on data from 2017, the most recent survey data that we have from American Community Survey. And then what I'd like to do is share with you a look online at a new capacity for accessing your ALICE information online. We'll then talk just a little bit about here from Ottawa County through Lynn about how this is being put to work in their work in Ottawa County. So here we are. The whole idea of ALICE is pulling folks together for greater awareness around how are people in my community doing. So next slide.
Hold on one second.
Okay.
So I apologize. I've never had this happen before with the, so we're trying a slightly different format with going right from Google Slides. There we go.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, we never had problems with coming out of a poll before. There we go. Okay, so I apologize, everybody. I'm not sure why it is giving us such problems, but the screen is saying it's stuck with the
on the poll response?
Yeah, it's still stuck on the poll responses.
Well, why don't, because I know we have an hour.
Yeah.
I'm going to just level set a little bit, and
Okay.
the slides will catch up with us.
Sure.
This looks like the slide that I'm looking for.
Okay.
For folks who are new to the ALICE report. ALICE is an acronym. It stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. And someone the other day who was looking at the report with me said, and you know, the most important letter in ALICE is E, because we know unemployment rates are at an all-time low, and yet we also know by way of the ALICE report that many folks aren't doing all that well, even though they may be employed. We also know that ALICE is very asset limited. Certainly the population that we're looking at through this report doesn't have savings. And we know when life happens, when it's a flat tire, when the baby gets sick, those savings are very important in order to weather that storm, especially if you're income constrained, maybe living week to week with your paycheck. So this gives you a sense. ALICE, an acronym, and yet ALICE is a person. We are looking at actual people. The ALICE report, just for backgrounder, was first done in New Jersey. It was a project done through Rutgers University in the United Way of Northern New Jersey. We were one of the first states to bring ALICE outside of New Jersey, and we did that through the Rutgers research team in collaboration with a Michigan Research Advisory Committee. So I always like to thank those folks who serve on our advisory committee from within Michigan to help make this report possible, along with Consumers Energy, who helps co-fund it along with Local United Way. We'll go ahead. What I want to do is, because we've got a proportion of folks on the phone who, for whom are new to ALICE, I'm going to do just a little bit of level set in terms of what this report is looking at. What does it measure? It's real simple, just three basic things. First of all, it establishes a basic household survival budget. What does it cost in order for me to make ends meet here in Ingham County, where I live? So as you can imagine, what it costs here in Ingham County varies from what it costs up in Lake County. And so it's going to adjust that basic survival budget from one community to the next. And that establishes for us what we call the ALICE threshold. So there is a threshold in terms of here is the bare minimum that you need to cover these very, very basic costs. And that's what we call the ALICE threshold. That threshold is overlaid with an income assessment. So this report is using public data sources in order to report on income. And so actual household income, what are households seeing? This income includes both public benefits, if folks may be making themselves available to those benefits, as well as earned income. And so those are the three metrics. There's no primary research here. All of this is based on existing public data. It's just putting these data sources together in such a way that, at least for us at United Way, we locally can better understand who's living in our community how well are folks doing? So let's take a look at the next slide in terms of this very basic household budget and what all it includes. We're looking at very, very basic housing, and that's where our worlds intersect big time. So what does it cost for housing? And this is based on the very least expensive housing available through HUD. Child care, food, transportation, health care. Technology was added this year. For those of you who knew the past two reports, the Research Advisory Committee has added basic cell phone or smartphone to the budget, because if you are working, it's pretty much expected that you will have a phone often to receive your work schedule and whatnot. 10% for overages in terms of miscellaneous plus taxes. Everyone pays taxes. This is a comparison just of a single adult household compared to a two adult household with an infant and a little one. When I ask folks anything stand out to you, many people say, yeah, where can I find housing for that cost? I like to reinforce the fact that these are very minimal. The Alice budget, if we go to the next slide, you'll see we are going to the most basic expenses in each one of these categories. And so on child care, we'd love for everyone to have their little ones at a 5-star child care center. This is for the least expensive. And as I said, fair market rent, 40% out for housing from HUD. So these are our sources. And can we go back to that slide just one very quickly? As we compare single adult, basically what we're seeing is that annually that single adult is going to be needing $21,000 a year, or an hourly wage of $10.50. This family of four, $61,000 or $30 an hour. I like to, for folks who aren't in our health and human service world, pause here, because there are many folks out there who would say $60,000 a year, that's got to be plenty. It's plenty until you start looking at what it actually costs to make ends meet. And so it's an awareness in terms of what it actually costs. Clearly, federal poverty level is no metric in terms of what it costs to survive. We all know that, but the Alice report helps make that very clear for folks. And I also like to just put the disclaimer in that we are not advocating for a survival budget. We want people to have, budgets that are sustainable budgets. But we use the survival budget in order to make a point of the level or magnitude of need. Let's move ahead. We took a look at the sources on the next slide. So the slide after that is going to give us a sense for where we are with this threshold. The 2019 data is sharing that 43% of our households across Michigan are below the Alice survival budget level. And this is another moment when I get outside of our health and human service arena with corporate partners or with public officials, where I like to just stop and let everybody think about that a little bit. Clearly, Alice is not them. Alice is us. Alice is the person that maybe helped you with a cup of coffee this morning. If you dropped your kid off at daycare, Alice is caring for our little one. Alice is making it so that my mom can stay in her home. Alice is everywhere. It's us. And we're at a magnitude of folks teetering on being able to just make ends meet, where it's really worth everyone taking a look and figuring out, how do we fit into this puzzle, and how can we address this percentage and lower the number of Alice households in Michigan. Let's go on to the next slide. And I like to compare where we are today with our 2017 data to 2010, because 2010 is post-recession. We're supposed to be out of this recovery. The past reports were comparing pre-Great Recession to current time. And as we're seeing, even post-recession from 2010 to 17, we're moving in a direction that's that we need to be paying attention to, actually ticking up in terms of the percentage of households that are in that Alice bandwidth. Little better news in terms of folks beneath that poverty level. The dark blue percentage is showing us the level of number of households below federal poverty level. That mid-level shows us the ALICE bandwidth, and that's how we get to 43%. So let's go on to the next slide. So, you know, while we're just delighted that the economy is better, we're happy that people have jobs. Again, this is helping us really kind of look behind the curtain in terms of how well households are actually doing. Looking just demographically at our population levels, the house on the left is looking at our general population. Our population has ticked up 3% since 2010. Our households have ticked up 6% since 2010 in terms of number of households below that ALICE threshold. We'll go on to the next slide. Households are changing. The most common household composition in Michigan is families without children. Here we're looking at those households that do have kids, and some better news in terms of two-parent families and slight decrease in terms of those households below that ALICE threshold. Clearly, single-headed households have higher percentages of ALICE households, but it's ticking down slightly for female-headed households. Let's move on. And I like to say this is the slide that explains everything. So how can we be at 43% below a survival budget when we have such high employment rates? It's because 61% of our jobs pay less than $20 an hour. Think back. We remember that that family of four needs over $30 an hour just to make ends meet. And so if we've got the magnitude of jobs paying under 20, we might have two parents, you know, each earning $15 an hour, and you're just barely making it over the threshold. And so there are challenges all the way around in terms of expenses, but clearly in Michigan, we have an income situation where jobs are simply not paying enough to cover the increasing costs of the basics. Nationally, if we take a look at what it costs to cover the basics, inflation has increased at 12% since 2010. Inflation of the basics in Michigan has increased by 27%. And so these costs are outpacing incomes that just aren't high enough for families in particular to make ends meet. Let's move on, and we're going to take a little closer look at incomes. This report is focused on workforce development, and if we just take a look at our top 20 occupations in terms of the most common occupations in Michigan, there are just 3 of them that would get that family up over the survival budget. And so again, to make the point, the jobs we have simply aren't paying enough for folks to cover the basics. Let's go on to the next slide, looking a little more closely in terms of retail salesperson's housing costs. On the right, we're looking at the hourly rate for the retail salesperson compared to what it's costing that individual for housing. And again, retail sales is the most common occupation here in Michigan. So we've got more people in that job category than any other, and it's simply not enough. We'll move on, looking a little more around workplace. We know that large firms are going to be paying at higher wages than small firms. We have small firms to thank for much of Michigan's rebound and recovery. But whether you're looking at plain earnings or you're looking at benefits and work supports, those individuals in large firms are going to be in a better position to cover the basics. And we know that many of our jobs here in Michigan are in the smaller firm category. We'll move ahead. And this is just a closer look kind of geographically at where those smaller firms are employing folks, clearly tip of the Mid and Upper Peninsula. We've got larger firm size in the lower part of the state. And you'll see how this trend coincides with our ALICE percentages and concentration of ALICE levels, increasing concentration of ALICE levels on firm size. Next slide. So the ALICE report, there are many sources of data, but it's giving us some good just general trend information. No doubt about it, senior population is growing in Michigan. 2040, a 64 increase by this year. This report is the first ALICE report where we saw an uptick in the number of households age 65 and above who are ALICE. And so we are seeing that population being squeezed in terms of making their budgets, and I'm thinking that that might coincide with some of your housing data as well.
Yep.
Let's move ahead to the next slide. I always like to take a look at just plain population, inflow, outflow of Michigan. The lower darker bar below is showing outflow. There's lots of in and out, those ages 18 to 24. If we look above the line, we're just barely hovering in terms of a population increase. And the lighter blue bars above, I like to point out that mid-blue level is inflow from other states. The light blue above that is showing us the inflow population from outside of the United States. And if we did not have this immigrant population flowing into Michigan, we would be underwater in terms of our population and decreasing population. So how important that influx is for our state. We'll go on to the next slide. So we always like to know, how do we compare to the rest of the state? And you know, we're about middle of the pack. We're 22nd nationally. If you look at this map, we should all be moving to North Dakota, where the cost of living is very low and incomes are, well, cover that cost. This gives us perspective as a nation that while, there are some really great work opportunities, income opportunities on the West Coast in California, it's really hard to live there. And so this gives us perspective nationally. There are 18 states that have full ALICE reports. The rest of the states, when you click in online, you'll just see the percentage above and below the threshold. We'll move on to the next slide just to give us a sense for where we are with ALICE. One of the real strengths we think of this report is that it helps policymakers and corporate leaders, helps all of us understand that this is not a problem in one part of our state. This is a statewide challenge that we have, getting enough income into households. But clearly this trending, if we look on the left, we're seeing moving to 2017, higher concentration levels, and in particular in the upper part of our state and the Upper Peninsula. So some real challenges that, as I know many of you know, who are serving rural communities on income levels and covering the basics. I'd like to pivot right now and share with you a little bit, just a real high-level look at how this data is available for you to access anytime online. We're really pleased because we know that while this information is very helpful statewide, it becomes really interesting when you start looking at the particulars. Starting at the top, you've got availability to the report itself. So the latest report is available in a PDF. If we look at that PDF to the far left, the county pages, let's just click into the county pages at the far left. And I'd like all of you just to see that there are 2 pages of ALICE data that are specific to your particular county. You can print these off by county, and that way you're able to have just a front back page we find that the county pages are the most frequently used part of this report. So you're going to be able to take a look at that comparison over time. You'll be able to take a look at some various household types, and you'll be able to access your county budget right here on the county pages. So
should I keep scrolling down? So
keep struggling down.
Struggling. Sorry, I was seeing how many folks are struggling. I'm like, oh yeah.
Well, this is, and my guess is many of you have used these county pages. But here's your budget, and then on the right we're breaking down by place in terms of township or city.
So Nancy, we've had a couple of folks just check in again. What is the URL where folks can access this information?
Great question. It is unitedforalice.org.
Yeah.
Or if you were to Google Michigan Alice, that takes you to our site, which will take you to this site. Okay. So it's United for Alice, or just type Michigan Alice into Google, and that'll get you there, a two-step process.
Yeah. So I realized we've actually moved. I kept scrolling or struggling, and now I've got us down to Alger County. So we've got.
It's a two-page per county.
It's a two-page per county.
And they're organized alphabetically.
Yeah.
So we'll back out of this. I wanted for you to just see. You can just close that tab, and we're great. So we've got just to the right of the county page, we've got state and county budgets. And this is going to give you a budget with a breakdown with different family configurations. And so if you want to really go to town and take a look at various family configurations, you can come up with the Alice budget for any size family. And there is even a formula at the bottom to calculate family configurations beyond those within these particular spreadsheets. You know, we would just love to see services made available by the Alice threshold versus 130% of poverty or whatnot. And so these breakdowns are very helpful if you're trying to calculate eligibility according to various configurations. Let's close this tab and I'll keep moving because I want to get full in on how this data can actually be used. There's a data file which is way too big. We're not going to go there right now. And then to the right of that, a bibliography. It's an 8-page bibliography. So it is, talk about somebody, you know, just pulling together data sources in order to paint this picture. We're really very, very pleased with the research team and what it's been able to do. What I'd like to do is come on down and let's just move into Ingham County. You can click into your county on that map. Let's go there. And it is going to give for us, let's pull down on county detail for Ingham. We might not be clicked into Ingham. We might need to double click. There we have it.
Yep.
And we can stay right here.
Okay.
So this is going to give us a look at township and city. And if you point on any part of this map within your county, you're going to get your total households, poverty, Alice, and above the threshold.
This is very cool.
We think so.
Yeah.
I'm glad you do.
This is so cool.
So it's a real improvement over the 600-page PDF that we began with, right? So hopefully you can get on unitedforalice.org, click into your county, and find your way. And then as we move down the page here online, this is just that data that is shared with you in your single page. So the household survival budget for your county, and then our numbers, the comparison over time, the look in terms of children, and then even other breakdowns in terms of race, ethnicity, and types of ages. Those are the other demographic breakdowns that we're seeing. Again, this is a report that's taking a little bit harder look at employment itself, firm size, who's employing, and then statewide, what jobs are paying. So that's a very quick look at the website, which is available for you. I hope you find it helpful. Are there any other questions, or should we move on to?
No. The only other comment that's come in so far and this won't come as a surprise to you, but somebody recognized that this looks more like a 211 report than an HMIS report. And I suspect that there's
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we're definitely looking at the whole. This is trying to look at the integration of what it takes to make ends meet versus a particular food or childcare or housing need. And I think that's really the beauty, that this is really broad and really high level. And the HMIS report is going to get, I think, more granular in terms of your population, which is powerful, right?
Right. But yeah, absolutely. It's much more of a deeper dive into understanding the homeless population.
There you go.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think we're at a point where we can close out this window.
We may. Yep.
Okay. And for the folks that, once again, I know Nancy's given the URL a handful of times now. It's also in the PowerPoint, and it's also, I think, on the cover of the ALICE report itself, which is, both of those things are available for download in the handout section.
Right.
So there's certainly ample opportunity here in case you don't have the capacity to pull up the website right now. And in fact, speaking of the devil, there is unitedforalice.org on the left-hand side, and that's the page we were just at. So there you go. And at this point, I think we're shifting over to Lynn. So Lynn, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Nancy. That really, it's been a while since we started our process to look at the needs for affordable housing in Ottawa County. So it was great to hear you talk about it, and then to remind myself of the process we went through, and what was key was really the ALICE data. When we started our process back in 2014, we began to talk about how we can better educate the community about the needs for housing, and ALICE, the first ALICE report came out, and it was enormously helpful and continues to be helpful as we tell the story. So what I wanted to do was just to share with you all what we did in Ottawa County to elevate the dialogue around affordable housing and what continues to happen here. So the Lakeshore Housing Alliance is the continuum of care for Ottawa County, and up until 2013, we were independent. We were not a 501c3, but we were independent and looking for a new home. We had been housed in a local nonprofit for quite some time, and we approached United Way initially, ostensibly to ask for funding, and what they said was that they were seeing, of course, the same. They were sitting around some different tables than we were, and they were seeing this need for affordable housing, and really wanted to put a stake in the ground around that particular issue. So they asked the Lakeshore Housing Alliance to come and be a part of United Way, and I think that was really quite visionary on the part of United Way. And what's nice, it's great for us to be on this call together because because we've been here now 6 years, it reminds me that there was a point when our local United Way really decided to take a stand and try to elevate that dialogue. So our process really lasted about 4 years, and it was a series of deliberate opportunities, taking opportunities to educate the community at all different levels. And one of my favorite memories about the process was the very first forum we had back in the spring of 2014. We brought together, and what was very key was that we brought together representation from all different sectors. So our process became a collective impact model, and so we incorporated all sectors from around the county, and we asked 3 questions at that very first forum. Is there a problem? Is there a need for more affordable housing? Whose fault is it? And who should fix it? And of course, we asked the questions because we knew the answers to it. And because we were able to get a group of people in the room to say, yes, we have a problem with affordable housing. It's no one sector's fault. and we're all responsible for fixing it. That was really our basis for moving forward. And they also selected United Way and the Lakeshore Housing Alliance to be the backbone organization for that process, which was certainly what we anticipated, but also really helpful to kind of put us in the lead for that process. We mapped out the continuum so that we could see where the gaps in services, where we had our gaps in services, which was also really helpful. And then over the course of the next 3 years, we began to engage deliberately more and more people from each of the sectors. We created a design team that had several representatives from each sector: business, education, nonprofit. Now I'm missing some of the other government was at the table, and this is where the design team was really where the ALICE data came in and helped us make the case. The design team was brought together as they were leaders in the community who were really interested in addressing affordable housing, and we charged them with making the case to the rest of the community. And so they looked and studied the ALICE data in particular, and were able to tell a story about people in the community who needed some relief and needed housing. And I think that it's fair to say that the idea of, and I think Nancy mentioned it right at the very beginning, she said that the E in ALICE was really important. And it's important when in telling the story about, or at least trying to make the case in front of business leaders in the community and people who are interested in understanding where the greatest need is. And so when we were able to use that ALICE data and actually tell stories about people, and Nancy again mentioned it earlier, the person who serves you coffee in the morning, the teacher who teaches your children, all of those, they all fall under that ALICE threshold. And it was, I think, it was like revelatory for the business leaders in particular, to understand that that people who live under the ALICE threshold, while there are certainly a number of, certainly a good percentage of people who live below the poverty line, there are a lot of people who are struggling day to day, just trying to make ends meet and at low or minimum wage jobs. In fact, the president of United Way here often tells the story that he was meeting with a local CEO, and he was explaining for the umpteenth time ALICE and what it means and who those people are, who the people are who fall under the ALICE threshold. And it was like a light bulb went off in the CEO's head. He looked across the room at his secretary or his executive assistant, and he said, "She's Alice." And it wasn't something that he'd ever recognized before. Now, what he did with that information, I don't know, but it was a great illustration of how important it is to just keep educating, especially business leaders, about the population and ALICE information. So the design team was able to make the case. In fact, we presented that at we had regular annual meetings to inform the entire county about what progress we were making. And so they made the case, and we were able to then engage over 100 people from around the county to participate in work groups where we identified some leverage points that were really important to increasing affordable housing. Things like public policy, increasing stock, lowering cost, support services. We made work groups around all of those strategies, and they were dedicated to working for about 18 months to come up with some action steps to keep the progress moving forward. And all along in every work group, the ALICE data played a part in addressing, in helping us to identify action steps that would help to increase affordable housing in the community. And so the very last meeting, and I know I kind of rushed through 4 years, but I think the last meeting was really such an important point in our process to increase that dialogue around affordable housing. we had over the years had lots of trouble, even though we were talking about ALICE and using language that business leaders would understand. We really had a lot of trouble engaging them at the work group level. We really wanted to. We were continually inviting business leaders to be a part of our process. They often attended annual meetings, but never to a great degree. And what happened in the last six months of our process was that there was one business leader in the community who really began to understand very deeply what the issue with the ALICE population was. And so he started to engage in conversations outside of our process and began to bring other very key business leaders around this idea of increasing affordable housing. And so at our final meeting, because our collective impact process was 4 years, at our final meeting back in 2016, it was the room had about 150 people in it, and I would say at least half, if not 2/3 of the people in the room were local business leaders who had been personally invited by their friends and colleagues, and it was really a tipping point for us, because once the business leaders could wrap their arms around the idea that we were talking about their employees and the people in the community who are most in need, they needed to address their needs as best they could. We were able to get a lot of business leaders to sign on, and not only that, the community foundations, while they had been a partner all along, with some push from the business leaders, both community foundations in our area agreed to grant $750,000 to a process to keep the process moving forward. So we are now in the middle of a 5-year pilot, and that person that was hired to focus 40 hours a week on increasing affordable housing has taken on 2 of the leverage points: public policy and increasing stock. And so he works with many of the municipalities in Ottawa County, as well as developers all over the county, to encourage them and assist them in trying to increase affordable housing. So it's been really exciting, and to see that we're still talking about affordable housing even now 3 years after the end of our process. I would like to say that there are some challenges in moving forward. I think one of the ways that we were able to move forward was because people could embrace the idea of workforce housing. We still use the term affordable housing, as many of you do, and many of you see the pushback that we see here. So our language around the increase in housing is really around workforce housing, and so a lot of the efforts have been around housing at the maybe 60% AMI, but more likely 80 to 100%, 120% of AMI, which is certainly a needed portion of the housing market, and we're glad to see that increasing. However, this is where the role of the advocate, in particular the role of the people who work with those who are experiencing homelessness, is to continually remind people about all of the populations that fall below the ALICE threshold. That workforce housing is really important, and we're grateful for the efforts to move that forward. Those of us in the homelessness arena really can't become complacent, and we need to keep reminding, in particular municipalities and those who are creating affordable housing, to find ways to develop housing for those who fall under that 60% AMI or into the poverty level. So that's been a real challenge. I've noticed that, especially over the last couple of years, that I think it's easy for municipalities and developers to stick with that range of housing, and so we're becoming more and more aware of that, and trying on a more regular basis to really remind people about the full range of folks who live under the ALICE threshold. So that's just a pretty short summary of what our process was, and I'm happy to share information. Any sort of, we have lots of templates and things that we worked with over the course of those 4 years, but happy to answer any questions or share any of that information.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. And we'll make sure in the follow-up email I send out to everybody that has the link to the recording for today's session to include your and Nancy's contact information as well. So if folks want to reach out to either of you directly with questions, you have the chance to do that. So I think we're at the point where we're getting close to winding down. So a couple of quick summaries for everybody. Here are the ALICE report key findings. And so I actually worked in a couple of extra things here. The bottom two bullet points are actually outside of the ALICE. So it's key findings from ALICE, but then it's also supplemented with a little bit of additional information. So just to kind of key in on some of the things that Nancy talked about, we're seeing a 43% total, which is of the households in Michigan are below the ALICE threshold, and that's a 6% increase from 2010 to 2017. As she really drove home with a handful of the slides that she covered, the overall improvement in employment is great, but the economic recovery has been uneven. Many households are slightly above the ALICE threshold in the past, but with increases in cost of living and flat wages have actually pushed them below the threshold. Again, I know that's not going to come as a big surprise to a lot of the folks on the webinar today, given the work that you're doing across the state. Cost of basic household expenses and the ALICE survival budget have increased steadily. For example, the cost of the average household budget increased by 27% from 2010 to 2017, despite a low inflation rate nationwide. And although unemployment rates are falling, ALICE workers are still struggling. And when we say unemployment rates are falling, I think we're talking 60-year lows at this point. 3.5% unemployment, I think, is the most recent numbers that came out last weekend. But as we all know, low-wage jobs are the jobs of the day, and 61% of all the jobs in Michigan pay less than $20 an hour. So I would actually circle down to that last bullet point, and this is data that came out earlier this year with the 2019 Out of Reach report from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and that I know a lot of you are familiar with because we asked at the beginning of today's session. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I highly recommend taking a look at. They have two different reports that are available. They have the Out of Reach report, which is the data source or the information source for this data point. And they also have the GAP report, which I think it came out a few years ago now. But Out of Reach really kind of supplements or complements a lot of what is covered in the ALICE report in terms of housing wages and looking at household income and how that parses out depending on household size. So the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and comparable to ALICE, it also has a national perspective as well as a state perspective. So for here in Michigan, for a 2-bedroom apartment, folks need to be making a housing wage of $17.25 an hour in order to make ends meet. So very much fills in or fits right in with the income or the findings that are coming out of the ALICE report. And then that second bullet point up from the bottom, of course, you couldn't have a presentation talking about data and not reference some data points from HMIS in some capacity. I would be thoroughly abused by my colleagues in the HMIS team if I didn't do this in some capacity. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Homeless Management Information System, it's the database that service providers all across the state are using. We got about 650 providers in this system at this point. And so the numbers that I've thrown up are from the 2017 statewide report. So this is from data that's collected from the providers all across the state, and this is aggregate data, and we're just looking at the profile of families. And so the average age of, so a couple of things. One, families home in the HMIS system tend to be single moms. 75% are moms, 25% are dads. So it's primarily single moms. And their average age is 33 years old. Their average kid's age is 7, and there's about 1.5 kids per household, and they're making just under $630 a month. So as we're thinking about kind of the ALICE families, I think these folks definitely fall at that lower end, below federal poverty level, all of that. But I think for our providers, it helps provide a bit of context in terms of when we're talking about these struggles that folks are having with being successfully housed or maintaining their housing. When we're looking at this amount of income on a monthly basis, all the pieces fit into place pretty easily. Because we look at the profile of the ALICE threshold, right, or the ALICE families and the folks that are under that threshold, and the amount of money they have coming in and the struggles they're seeing, and then we see our folks with their income profile. And to give everybody a sense of perspective, for 2017, the average monthly income for a homeless person in the state of Michigan was $649. So it gives everybody a bit of perspective. Mm-hmm. So that leads to the question of, okay, so we know we've got issues. We've got plenty of data to back us up. As Nancy said earlier, if you go to unitedforalice.org, there's an 8-page bibliography of data sources that are available, which could certainly supplement the very short list of data sources we listed at the beginning of this webinar. So a couple of things. MICA has policy priorities. The Association of United Ways has policy priorities. So we wanted to put those out in front of folks because there are obviously ways that folks can plug into the work that's already happening with the state level, with our agencies. And of course, a number of you identified that you're already working on advocacy efforts. So we want to make sure that the work that is happening maybe at the local level is also connected with work that's happening at the broader level as well. So these are just a sampling of the policy priorities that the coalition has for 2019 to 2020. I kind of filtered out some of the ones that were more directly related to homeless service delivery, such as increasing funding for service providers, things like that. And as you can see, we're very much interested in increasing access and decreasing barriers. Decreasing barriers, interestingly enough, looks like we may have a few pieces of legislation drop this fall. So if this is something that's of interest to you and you're not plugged into the work that the coalition's doing, please check out our website, mihomeless.org. It's basically the back end of my email address, and you've been getting bombarded with emails from me about today's webinar. So I would highly encourage you to check out our website and the advocacy section of our website to get a better sense of the work that we're doing. And of course, United Way also has generated a list of policy priorities that they've identified coming out of the work that's happening around the ALICE report. And some of this, I think, will really resound with our folks on this call in terms of increasing support for 211. As most folks know on this webinar, that's kind of the backbone for accessing services, especially after hours. Increasing support for childcare, increasing support for early literacy programs, and of course, strengthening and reinstating EITC. Let's get it done. We know that that putting more money in people's pockets after tax time is an important thing. So, yeah, these are pretty straightforward.
We'd even settle for doubling it over 2 years.
Yeah.
That's aspirational.
Yeah. So that actually winds our portion of presentation. And of course, we are right at 1 o'clock, and know that we promised everybody we try to get you out of here by 1. And so I see we've got a comment, but very few questions, surprisingly, since the second half of the webinar kicked in. And basically, the comment we have right now is just Rose thanking us for taking the time to present this information. She found it exceptionally useful. So
thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for participating. So noting that we're right at 1 o'clock, we'll maybe leave it open for another 30, 60 seconds, something like that. If anybody has any last-minute lingering questions while we have Lynn and Nancy with us, this is obviously the time to get those questions out there.
I would also, as you're thinking about that, encourage everyone to connect with your local United Way folks. If you haven't already, they have copies of the report. They have, they're here to help spread the word on ALICE. So if they can assist, or if I can assist with more on ALICE, we're really interested in partnering, as always. So. Perfect.
And thank you, Nancy. That's a good reminder to folks to take advantage of the resources in their own backyard. I think we have it. Yeah, so we have some more comments thanking us for doing the presentation.
Very nice.
So I think that's where we're at with the hour. And so I just once again will thank our presenters, Nancy and Lynn, and both of you are total rock stars, and we very much appreciate you taking the time to help us put this presentation together and sharing your expertise with us for today. And for those of you calling in, I think we'll sign off at this point, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon, and talk to you soon, I'm sure. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Thanks, Jason.